Hi everyone, I'm here in the North Cascades and I wanted to take some time today to talk to you guys about nettles. My name is Marika, I'm a bioregional herbalist and these are our nettles. Let's get started. Before we talk about the medicinal benefits of nettles or the, herbal actions of nettles, I really want to talk about the type of habitat and environment that nettles lives in and really likes. From a bioregional perspective, getting to know the habitat and the context, the ecological context that the plant lives in, helps us understand the plant and what it does better. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So let's talk about more specific ecological conditions that nettles lives in to help us understand the plant better. One of the first things that I think is really important and part of what how nettles become such an amazing superfood for us as humans is they love leaf litter. They love nitrogen-rich soils. They love the detritus. And when we find them in the spring, oftentimes they are rising up out of this leaf litter. And sometimes it's the very first kind of green thing that we see in the spring. Here in the Northwest, and particularly in the places that I harvest nettles, I find that nettles really likes to live in places where there's also Pacific bleeding heart, as well as Pacific waterleaf, and just these really lovely ground cover plants that love moist conditions and also love this stuff. I think the fact that nettles lives in habitats that are more often than not very moist um, is an indication of what the plant does as well. Um, Oftentimes when I'm harvesting nettles, I would consider those spaces riparian habitats. And what a riparian habitat is kind of a threshold, a boundary between water, so a source of water like a river, and land. And there's all types of different plants and organisms that really thrive in that environment and have an affinity for that type of environment, this like boundary environment between water and land. um, I find that nettles tolerates water um, much better than a lot of plants, and you'll often find them in kind of just like, you'll find them in little trenches alongside the road, um, any place where there's kind of like a little area of standing water, um, and yeah, you'll always be surprised as to where you might find nettles. They're a very versatile plant, and they don't seem to be too picky as to like where they want to live. But when I'm wild harvesting, these are the types of conditions that I will find for nettles and the types of conditions that I will look for. So, getting more into the role that nettles play in our ecosystem is because they love these nitrogen rich soils, which all plants love nitrogen, that's absolutely a fact. But what makes nettles really special is they are considered a dynamic accumulator. And what this means from an ecological standpoint is that nettles are really good at mining minerals and nutrients from the soil. When we think about all plants do this, in a way, and that's how they receive, the nutrients and stuff that they need to live. But nettles do this on like the next level. And we can also think about horsetail, which is another plant that comes up in the early spring. We also consider a dynamic accumulator. And so these plants, as they're growing, they are drawing nutrients and mining nutrients from and minerals from deep within the soil and accumulating that in their leaf matter. And the result of this is an incredibly nutrient dense food. So nettles is incredibly high in calcium, it is high in protein, it is high in vitamins A, C, and K, and a whole host of other, micronutrients and minerals that are really essential building blocks for our body. A lot of those, and silica as well, which horsetail is an amazing source of silica. And what is so amazing about this plant is that it is so good at its job that once it gets too tall and once it's later in the season, um, it'll actually be like too strong, like too many minerals, that it can become mildly toxic to the body. And so, everyone has their favorite times of the year that they like to harvest nettles. For me, I really love early spring, just because I think I get so excited about seeing nettles and I just want to incorporate them into all of my dishes and everything. They really are a choice edible. And then as the plant grows, and I'll show you a video of what the little flower pods and seed pods look like. I want to give a shout out to Raven Song Herbs, who has kind of talked about that particular stage being the best stage to tincture nettle at, because it's kind of this optimal place of it's accumulated all of these nutrients, but it's not so many nutrients that it's going to actually be maybe a little bit destructive to our internal ecosystem. I would also say that some folks like to harvest the seeds of nettles. Some herbalists work with the seeds of nettles. I would say my kind of go-to person that I talk about when it comes to working with nettle seed is the herbalist David Winston, who has kind of worked with nettles and specifically nettle seed as a kidney trophorestorative. Another thing about nettles is a lot of folks talk about them in the spring because it can help us with our allergies. And I want to shout out to my friend Sarah at Rowan and Sage for kind of digging deeper on this and talking about the fact that nettle tea is not going to help you with your allergies, because the particular constituents in nettles, such as quercetin, those things are best extracted with alcohol, specifically from a fresh plant, and or freeze-dried nettles. And so if you want to learn more specifically about that, you can go follow her. A feature that you'll find in some nettles is a purple kind of blush on the leaves, and as well as purple in the stalk itself. And I think, we'll see that in some nettles. I'll see that in some of my patches of nettles. I won't see it in others. For some patches, I'll see that blushing early in the spring, and I think it's because of the frost, like the cold kind of makes that purple blushing, but then we'll also see it in the stalks. And that purple color tells us that there are, that plant is rich in flavonoids and antioxidants. So when I do harvest, some of the stands that I really harvest from the most have those purple stalks pretty much all the way through the season, which is pretty amazing. So a really important part for my herbal practice as a bioregional herbalist is I'm looking at all of the different environmental factors that contribute to this plant's thriving, their role in the ecosystem, and that gives me information about what that plant does in the body. And so something that I think is really lovely about nettles is this component of them having an affinity for water in some way. And I think that that affinity for water tells us, information about what that plant does in the body. Sometimes plants that we find in a more moist environment might actually be plants that create a more moist constitution in the body. And sometimes we'll find plants that actually do the opposite, where they love being in a moist environment, but they actually create a more dry constitution in the body. Nettles are extremely nutritive, so they are just really nourishing for our body and for our bones and our connective tissue and all of that good stuff, but they are also fairly drying. If you drink a 32-ounce mason jar of nettle infusion in a day, one, you're going to be up all night peeing because this plant is a diuretic, and two, you are going to wake up with a really dry tongue. And so for me personally, already have a lot of dryness in my system. So I like to always pair milky oats with my nettles, in my teas and infusions and in my tinctures as well. Just because I want to provide that balance. I think that we can overdo it with nettles, just like we do with everything else. And even though it is an amazing plant that is a superfood and, such a powerful herbal ally, we want to use it in moderation, at least for those of us that have like kind of dry constitutions. Um, or who can be very, susceptible to dryness, I should say. So, what else could I say about nettles? I would say that for me, how I work with nettles in my herbal practice is I use it in a lot of my formulas that are directed towards blood and fluids. And again, this is kind of like one of those doctrine of signature moments where a plant that really loves to be by water maybe can help us with the waters in our own bodies. I find that nettles is like slightly alterative, so it helps kind of move things through the body. It helps increase the body's ability for kind of the movement of fluid, whether that is blood or urine. It certainly moves the urine because it is a very strong diuretic. It makes us pee. But then I also use it for the blood to help build the blood and move the blood in combination with other herbs that are like stronger alternative herbs. So I guess maybe one of the last things that I will say about nettles is maybe the most obvious one, which is it's called stinging nettle for a reason. It has these little hairs on the stem and on the leaves, that obviously create a highly inflammatory response in the localized area that we touch it in. And there are particular types of acids on those needles, or on those hairs that cause that reaction. They cause a histamine response, a really strong one, when we rub it on our bodies or, brush by it when we're walking in the woods. And that specifically has been used as a traditional medicine practice in cultures around the world. And I think it speaks very highly to the general kind of um, anti-inflammatory properties of nettles in general, because when we rub it up against our skin, it creates a highly inflammatory response. I will show a picture or a video. Basically, our skin blisters up, it gets really red, it gets really hot. And what's amazing about that is it really moves and circulates blood to that area quickly. And so, how it's been used in cultures around the world is, brushing up against the skin or flogging specifically, and used to treat kind of rheumatic conditions, arthritic conditions, and other types of like chronic pain ailments. I really like the way that Kyle Denton from Tippecanoe Herbs talks about urtication, where when we're when we have such a high inflammatory response. I see this beautiful bee. When we have such a big inflammatory response, it's as if nettles is reminding our body that there is healing that still needs to be done in a particular place, and it kind of wakes up the tissues and brings in blood to wake up those tissues. So anywhere where we have maybe like chronic dull pain that maybe is a little achy, and then again for folks with more rheumatic conditions, I just love the way that he talks about it, as far as like sometimes our body can just like forget that there are these places in our body that are holding something that needs to be released or moved or just given attention in general. So thank you, Kyle Denton, for that insight.